Revenge with Karen.
On a Tuesday morning soaked in printer toner and the stale breath of someone's reheated salmon from the break room, I found myself sitting through yet another ops sync where I was asked to just take notes on a project I built from the goddamn ground up. The director, who once thought EBITDA was a skin condition, was stumbling through a slide deck I personally formatted while calling me operations support. I'm not support. I'm the entire scaffolding duct taped together to keep this three-legged circus of a logistics tech firm from collapse. I make sure our vendor contracts don't expire in the middle of delivery season. I clean up the CTO's metadata dumps so our audit trail doesn't look like a toddler's spaghetti drawing. And when the last VP signed a deal with a supplier who literally got sued for shipping empty crates. Yeah, it was the one who buried that breach of contract clause in our favor so deep, legal still thinks it was divine intervention. But sure, support. Oh, and while you're here, because 95% of you listening right now won't hit the subscribe button, do us all a favor and tap that like and subscribe. Seriously, it helps the team keep digging up these wild stories while I keep suppressing the urge to throw my badge into the shredder. Anyway, way I survive this place is by keeping quiet and staying several spreadsheets ahead of disaster. I'm the type of employee who knows which 3 fire codes we technically violate and who forged the old CFO's signature on that policy renewal back in 2020. I don't gossip. I don't complain. I just keep every receipt in triplicate. And lately, the receipts were getting very interesting. About 4 months ago, exec floor started doing that weird thing where every conversation ended in a whisper. You know the vibe, when someone drops the word acquisition like it's a disease, and suddenly half the office is asking if they need to update their LinkedIn. But no one said anything directly. Not to me, anyway, because in their heads, I'm the furniture. The office Roomba, always there, quietly blinking, clearing the mess, but never worth addressing directly. Except I wasn't blinking. I was logging. Didn't know that I was the one compiling the vendor overlap reports. Or that I'd been tasked, indirectly, with preparing integration readiness docs that no one had even acknowledged. Which means I knew exactly what they were trying to hide under layers of strategic alignment and workflow optimization. Here's the real story they were too busy flattering each other to notice. The platform we bragged about in pitches, held together with expired API keys, and one developer named Brock who works in Croatia and hasn't responded to a Slack message since April. Our proprietary matching algorithm, lifted from a white paper, barely obfuscated, and legally vulnerable if anyone cared to dig. And don't even get me started on the employee misclassification issue. The international contractors in Malaysia, payroll time bombs, ticking. While they all performed PowerPoint CPR on a dying valuation, I started noticing the absurd things, like how the VP of Biz Dev suddenly started wearing dress shoes to Zoom calls, or how the CEO insisted all documents be printed instead of shared online. The final clue? The new director of strategic partnerships, who asked me if our compliance software came with a night mode. Sir, it's a secure audit log, not Netflix. Still, no one asked my opinion. They never do. But I started building a separate little folder on my home drive, labeled it recipes, just in case IT ever peaked. Inside, every discrepancy, every quiet expense report flagged for non-standard vendor hosting, every adjustment to internal policy dates with no version history. I wasn't just preparing for due diligence, I was preparing for truth, with timestamps. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I got a message, not from my company, from a third party. They said they were interested in clarity. And let me tell you, clarity was the one thing I'd been cultivating for years. While they were busy peacocking their titles and slapping synergy buzzwords on broken workflows, I was becoming something else. I wasn't just operations anymore. I was the insurance policy no one thought to write. The quiet little switch that, when flipped, could light up every dark corner of their deal. And they were about to find out what that looked like in real time. I knew something was off the moment they booked the conference room with catering. That's the corporate version of loading a gun in plain sight. Cold sandwiches and passive-aggressive coffee orders, classic signs that someone was about to get theatrically sacrificed in front of the herd. My name wasn't on the invite, of course, but I was kindly asked to join at the last minute. That alone told me 2 things. 1, they were about to ambush me, and 2, they were too stupid to realize they were stepping into my terrain. The VP of operations strutted in like he'd just personally invented shipping containers, sweating through his shirt in a way that screamed performing dominance poorly. He slapped a manila folder onto the table like it was a verdict, not a prop, and then launched into his big monologue, eyes gleaming with the kind of righteous fury only someone with no real power can fake convincingly. You've been moonlighting as a consultant. That's breach of contract. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I didn't even uncross my arms. I just reached into my tote bag, pulled out a single stapled document, crisp, notarized, legal letterhead intact, and slid it across the table like I was tipping a dealer in Vegas. No one said a word. The room tightened. Intern in the corner stopped chewing mid-bite. Even the VP's breath stuttered. And then the company's in-house counsel, Steve, a man who once asked if Merdata was related to Metaverse, picked it up. He didn't get halfway down the page before his entire face drained to the color of oatmeal. His lips moved, but his voice barely carried across the mahogany table. "Sir," he said, looking at the CEO, not the VP. She was consulting for the acquisition team. Pin drop silence. She knows everything. I nearly smiled, not because I was proud, not yet, but because for the first time in years, I saw it register in their eyes. I had leverage. Real, indisputable, board-documented leverage. See, the contract they were waving like a Bible in a tent revival didn't say what they thought it said, because none of them had actually read it. The clause they were trying to hang me with, subsection 14B, had an exception for consulting services with prior legal approval and full board notification, which I had, signed off 3 months ago, by Steve himself, with a note that said, and I quote, "looks clean, low risk." What Steve didn't know, what none of them had asked, was who exactly I was consulting for. The acquiring firm. The very people they were trying to charm with inflated projections, half-sanitized vendor histories, a war chest of buzzwords that collapsed under scrutiny. The same people who were preparing to buy this company, assuming it passed compliance muster. Spoiler, it wouldn't. And thanks to me, they already knew that. Back in the room, the VP's mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. The CEO looked like someone had punched him in the jaw with a rolled-up spreadsheet. HR tried to interject with something about protocol and immediate offboarding, but I calmly held up a finger, just one. "If you'd like to review Section 5, page 2, you'll see the Conflict of Interest Disclosure Form," I said, tone flat. "It includes the name of the acquiring firm. You all signed it." The lawyer flipped to it like he was disarming a bomb. There it was. In ink, their signatures stacked like Jenga blocks over a clause they didn't bother to read. I could practically hear the internal panic rebooting in real time. "I'd like to return to my desk now," I added. "Do you intend to remain employed here?" The CEO finally croaked. "Depends," I said, standing slowly, "on whether you'd like to maintain a clean valuation going into final due diligence, or not." Their silence wasn't shock. It was fear, dressed up as confusion. As I walked out, I could feel it, like heat rising off concrete in summer. Realization that they had built a company on shadows and forgotten I was the one holding the flashlight. And now, I'd just lit the fuse. The second I stepped into the hallway, the shouting began. You could hear it through the glass, even over the muted hum of the AC, real raised voices now, not corporate stage whispers. It wasn't just the VP flailing anymore. It was the CEO, red-faced, and asking the question he should have asked 3 months ago. Why the hell wasn't I told she was consulting with them? A pause. Then the lawyer's voice, tinny and defensive. "You signed it. The board signed it. You said to expedite minor legal reviews that is minor to you." And just like that, the cracks weren't just showing, they were splintering. I didn't need to stick around for the rest. I already knew how it'd go. Legal would try to pin the mess on HR. HR would blame legal for the rubber stamp policy. The VP would trip over his own ego trying to salvage face with a story about intent and unauthorized access. But the best part, they weren't even asking the right question yet. Not why didn't we know, but what exactly does she know and who did she tell? I took the elevator down, slow and easy. Didn't run, didn't hide, didn't delete a single file. HR must have been sprinting behind me because I barely made it 3 steps into my office before Julie from HR came in with that strained smile that HR people wear like body armor. Clipboard clutched like a weapon, voice dripping with artificial calm. "So, I just wanted to check in, see where your head's at regarding next steps." I didn't even look up. Just unlocked my cabinet, pulled out my half-drunk coffee, and took a long, burning sip. I turned and gave her the exact opposite of panic. Depends, I said. You still want a clean exit valuation? Her eyes twitched. Just a flicker. But that was enough. Because she didn't know. No one in that building understood what Clause 7.3 in my consulting agreement really meant. They read it as a compliance transparency clause, boilerplate, routine, buried under jargon. What it actually said, that I was required under obligation, provide the acquiring firm with full disclosure of all known operational, technical, and legal liabilities relevant to post-merger integration. And I had, in obsessive detail, weekly, with receipts, every undocumented third-party tool, every time a department backdated compliance training, every time someone falsified an onboarding document to meet a deadline. I'd submitted it all to the buyer's team under the protections of a confidentiality rider, been reading it like a procedural crime novel with me as the ghostwriter. I didn't nuke the company. I just pointed to where the rot had been hiding. They were the ones who left it to fester. Julie kept her smile, but I could see the panic now settling behind her eyes like fogged-up glass. Of course, she said, we just want to make sure everything stays constructive, like duct taping a plane wing mid-flight. I nodded slowly. Maybe stop trying to offboard the one person who kept the FAA from grounding you. Silence. Then she blinked, her clipboard sinking slightly. We'll regroup. She left without asking for my badge. Back at my desk, the screen was still lit with the quarterly compliance doc I'd been asked to update. I scrolled down, past the untouched bullet points someone from finance had plugged in without reading. Half the line items were already invalid. They just didn't know it yet. Email popped up, internal from legal. Urgent confirm if agreement clause permits external data sharing. I didn't answer. They'd already confirmed it the moment they signed the damn thing. Instead, I opened a separate tab, my secure folder, shared only with the buyer's legal team. I uploaded the latest file, labeled it Internal Response to Consulting Agreement Inference Risk. Hi. Then I hit send. They wanted to play executive poker. Shame they didn't know I'd already seen every card in their hand and reshuffled the deck. It started at one of those dreadful industry compliance expos, 3 days of lukewarm buffet eggs, badge scanning sales vultures, and panel discussions so dry they made SEC filings feel like erotica. I wasn't even supposed to go. Our company only sprang for the ticket because the VP didn't want to sit through a talk titled Operational Transparency in Pre-Acquisition Environments. Too many syllables, he said. So I went, took notes, shook hands, and listened. And at the networking mixer, where someone thought compliance-themed cocktails was a good idea, I met Nathan. He wasn't flashy. No blazer with elbow patches or 2 white veneers. Just khakis, neutral badge with the name of private equity firm I'd only heard whispered in dry M and a gossip, and the kind of posture you only get from reading entire SEC reports cover to cover. Twice. He asked a single question. You handle internal compliance logistics for your firm, don't you? I paused. Most people at these events didn't know I existed. Among other things, I said. He smiled. Would you be open to consulting off hours? Hypothetically, of course. That word, hypothetically, hung in the air like a trap. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked him to clarify who he represented. He gave me the name that just 2 weeks earlier had appeared in an internal email chain marked confidential, preliminary outreach. They were circling us, quietly, watching from a distance like a hawk casing a limping rabbit. I told him I'd consider it, but only with full transparency. Legal sign-off, board notification, everything above board. I expected him to ghost me. He didn't. 3 days later, a formal inquiry hit my inbox, then a draft agreement. Then, after some back and forth with legal, who waved it through with all the attention of someone renewing a gym membership, I had an executed consulting contract. My terms were simple: limited hours, external advisory role only, and total indemnification if anything went sideways. I wasn't risking my livelihood. I was just providing operational insight relevant to transitional compliance. And I did provide insight. I gave them structure charts, documentation schemas, role-based access protocols, and workflows that, frankly, I'd been begging my own company to fix for years. But Nathan wasn't interested in fluff. He wanted the dirt. What are the gaps? He asked one night, on a Zoom call where he sat in front of a blank wall and never once took notes. If we buy this company, what's going to bite us in 6 months? I laughed, bitter and quiet. How much time do you have? Because here's the thing, I wasn't betraying anyone. I was doing what no one inside our walls had the stomach or spine to do. I was documenting truth. I didn't fabricate. I didn't speculate. I compiled. I organized. I cited. And every time I flagged something that could tank an acquisition, I attached 3 PDF exhibits: employee misclassification, contractor mispayments, vendor conflicts of interest, data retention policies with more holes than a chain link fence. Nathan called them toxins, but I also handed them antidotes: process fixes, training protocol overhauls, vendor negotiation playbooks, all of it grounded in real operational experience. My experience. You're a scalpel, he said once. Most people just hand us a shovel. That stuck with me, because in my own company, I was background noise. Paper pushing wallpaper. Someone you CC'd on an email only to cover your ass. To Nathan and his team, I was an asset, a lighthouse in their due diligence fog. They knew the risks of a poisoned acquisition. Hidden lawsuits, phantom revenue, cultural rot. I gave them a flashlight and the map. All they had to do was follow the breadcrumbs. Sometimes I wondered if my bosses ever stopped to think about what kind of person they were ignoring, what kind of history I was quietly archiving behind my locked desktop folders and labeled thumb drives. They had 100 chances to ask what I was doing on weekends. They never did. So when the time came to report what I knew, I did exactly what my contract required. I told the truth, and that truth was going to cost them. They didn't fire me that day, didn't even suspend me. That would have required some semblance of control over the situation. And by the time I walked out of that conference room, the control they once lorded over everyone had evaporated like cheap cologne in a data center. What they did instead was panic. The kind of raw, unfiltered executive-grade panic usually reserved for hostile takeovers and front-page lawsuits. By 10 a.m. the next morning, IT had launched a full forensic sweep of my company email, digging through years of compliance memos, thread chains, auto-forward rules, and calendar invites. Their internal Slack lit up like a Vegas slot machine. What access did she have? Can we lock her credentials? Do we need to disable her SSO? Too late. So late. Because the gold mine they were looking for didn't live on their servers anymore. It hadn't for weeks. Clause 7.3 in my consulting agreement didn't just authorize full disclosure, it required it. Under that clause, and with legal sign-off, I had already submitted every relevant file directly to the buyer's secure portal. Dated, indexed, summarized, every irregular contractor invoice, every vendor selected without RFP, every patch job passed off as a system upgrade. Even the internal Slack logs I screenshotted after someone in finance joked, thing the auditors never ask about off-books perks. Legal was the first to realize they'd screwed up. Steve, poor soul, emailed me a single-line message that afternoon. Can we confirm exactly what was shared externally? I didn't reply. I forwarded it to the buyer's rep with the subject line, Inquiry Internal Realization Timeline Begins. The buyer's team had gone quiet too. Radio silent. They'd pulled out of all scheduled syncs. No more weekly check-ins. No calls. No friendly follow-up notes. Just one email, one line. Concerns raised during due diligence. Additional documentation under internal review. That was it. 7 words, and our company valuation just started free-falling. By Thursday, the board was demanding answers. Not just about me, but about everything. Why weren't these issues flagged earlier? Who signed off on the vendor compliance reports? Had it been approving software subscriptions billed to dummy LLCs? And who exactly was managing risk assessment for external contractors? My name came up, a lot, but no one came to me directly. Because how do you face someone you've ignored for half a decade and ask if they just lit the fuse under your golden parachute? I sat in my office, blinds down, sipping tea from my world's most underappreciated employee mug. It had been a gag gift. To me, outside my door, the whispering started again. But this time, I wasn't the subject of it. They were whispering about the acquisition halting, about layoffs, about clawbacks. One brave soul muttered something about clawing back my bonus. Good luck, buddy. The buyer already wired me an advisory retention payment 2 weeks ago. Ironclad, separate entity. By Friday, 2 of the junior execs had staged a closed-door meeting with legal to determine if they could rescind my access. They found out I'd already removed myself from everything. Gracefully, quietly, like someone leaving a hotel room cleaner than when they arrived. The new director of integration, assigned by the buyer, emailed me directly that evening. Thank you for your clarity. We're currently adjusting our internal understanding of the company's asset value. Translation, we're slashing the price, and we're using your files to do it. I leaned back, closed my laptop, and let the quiet settle. It was the kind of silence I'd never been granted before. Not in meetings, not in hallways, not when I flagged critical risks or begged for redundant backups. It was the sound of a machine realizing it had been running on borrowed time, and the one person who could have tuned it was already gone. Didn't understand what I was worth until I stopped talking. Now, they were drowning in the very systems I built, and I wasn't going to throw them a life raft. The news hit at 8:43 a.m. on a Monday, which meant I got to watch the boardroom meltdown unfold in real time from my office, croissant in hand, as chaos filtered through the walls like toxic gas. The subject line on the buyer's email was sterile enough: revised valuation proposal phase adjustment. The attachment, a full-blown detonation. The number at the top of the term sheet had dropped by $60 million, not deferred, not restructured, gone, slashed clean off the top like a bad haircut. And the first justification listed in the footnotes: operational irregularities flagged during third-party compliance review, with a reference code that pointed unmistakably to a folder named Initial Disclosures Consultant 4. Me. Within 15 minutes, an emergency board meeting was called. I wasn't invited, of course, but the walls in that building were thin, and the people in it even thinner-skinned. Voices carried. Panic carries even louder. 60 million. Where the hell did that number come from? She gave them that information. Why the hell was she even talking to them? She was approved to consult. No, she said she was. She had a contract, for God's sake. It went through legal. Then the quietest question of all: who signed off? Pause, long enough to draw blood. The CEO's voice came low and miserable. I did. A silence followed, deeper than any I'd ever heard in that building. You could almost hear the sound of equity packages evaporating. See, the board hadn't been paying attention. They'd seen the buyer's initial interest and started mentally shopping for second homes. They thought due diligence was a formality, a box to tick. Didn't realize it had teeth, and that I'd already sharpened every one of them. That morning, I got exactly 2 calls. The first was from Steve, our in-house lawyer. It rang twice, then went silent. He must have thought better of it. Either that, or he realized there wasn't a damn thing he could say that wouldn't make it worse. The second came from a 646 number I didn't recognize. It was Nathan. "You're about to be asked to stay quiet," he said. "No pleasantries. I figured I need you to know none of this changes how we see your value." There was a pause. "The kind you fill with truth or silence." He chose truth. "We want you on the transition team, but on our side. Internal. Title, Senior Integration Officer. You'll help us clean this." It wasn't a request. It was an offer of allegiance. I looked at my screen. The folder where all the skeletons lived. The audit trails, the gap maps, quiet sabotage I documented and filed away like seeds waiting for winter to end. "I assume this means you've reviewed everything. We used your reports to justify the valuation adjustment." A beat. "You documented everything." That was the moment the quiet fury inside me began to melt. Not because I wanted revenge. Revenge is for people who think someone will eventually apologize. What I wanted was recognition. I wanted someone to say it out loud. Nathan just had. I accepted the offer with a single condition: that my NDA with the current company remain untouched until the deal closed. I wasn't going to let them off the hook with some quick pre-spin narrative about market conditions or realignment strategy. They were going to wear this, and they were going to know exactly why. By noon, I got the official contract. By 2 p.m., CEO was forced to answer a pointed question from the board. Why did you authorize the dismissal of a consultant actively supporting our valuation? He had no answer, because there was none. They tried to bury me before they realized I'd already written the autopsy. The buyer trusted me because I didn't just flag the mess, I mapped the cleanup. And now I had a front row seat to the teardown. From the other side, exit interview was scheduled for Friday at 11 a.m. A classic HR maneuver designed to keep things clean, tucked neatly before the lunch lull, like firing someone between bagel deliveries. I showed up 10 minutes early, not because I was nervous. I just wanted a good seat for the performance. The room was small, beige, and desperate to be neutral. Generic framed photo of a mountain. A water bottle with a torn label. One too many chairs. They weren't sure how many people would show. Julie from HR was already waiting, seated across from legal's new junior counsel, who looked about 12 and clutched a leather folder like it contained nuclear codes. No one made eye contact when I sat down, which was fine. I wasn't here for small talk. "Thanks for coming," Julie started, using that saccharine HR tone reserved for harassment settlements and pre-litigation exits. "Just wanted to go over a few final steps, including your NDA obligations," and I held up a hand. "Let's stop pretending this is a routine offboarding. You want me to sign a supplemental non-disparagement clause and reaffirm confidentiality across all integration materials, yes?" The junior counsel blinked like I'd read the script upside down. Yes. That's part of it." "Then let's be clear," I said, calmly setting a printed document on the table. "Face up, I've accepted a role with the acquiring firm. Senior Integration Officer. Effective next week." Julie blinked. The attorney went still. I continued. "That position inherently grants me post-merger oversight access per Standard M and a protocol. Your NDA won't interfere with that unless it violates federal whistleblower statutes, which it doesn't. So I'll sign your boilerplate, but not your gag order. This is a clean exit, but not a quiet one." Silence was exquisite. Finally, Julie swallowed. "Won't that be awkward, working with former colleagues?" I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Not for me. They tried to keep their expressions neutral, but the sweat betrayed them. Because here's what they hadn't processed yet. My new title didn't just come with a pay bump and a fresh laptop. It came with the authority to review retention candidates for the executive suite, which meant I would be deciding who got to keep their title, their salary, their relevance. I wasn't some bitter ex-employee slinking away with a cardboard box. I was the architect of the second act, and the buyer trusted me to sweep the stage. I signed their generic NDA with a pen I brought myself, blue ink, deliberate strokes. They didn't even argue. There was nothing to argue. Their legal team had already confirmed it days ago. My consulting contract was valid, disclosures protected. And now, with the integration team absorbing operations oversight, I was no longer under their authority. I was above it. Julie tried to save face with a quick pivot to logistics. "Return your badge, turn in your laptop, submit your final hours." I agreed to everything, smiled, even thanked them. Let them think this was closure. But for me, it was just positioning. That afternoon, I received my onboarding packet from the buyer. New email address, access credentials, org chart. Right there in black and white, integration review, executive team oversight assigned. My name. I laughed, not loudly. Just a single exhale that tasted like justice. The same people who'd once dismissed me as support were about to find out what it felt like to sit on a spreadsheet labeled discretionary retention. And I wouldn't need to yell or demand anything. All I had to do was highlight their names and hit delete. By Monday morning, the dominoes had already started to fall. I didn't have to push them. I just sat back, logged in with my shiny new credentials, and watched gravity do the rest. At 7:12 a.m., the head of product sent a polite resignation email to the board, citing health reasons and a need to prioritize family. Translation: he saw the writing on the wall, and he wanted to quit before I made it official in the retention ledger. By 8:05, SVP of Business Development followed suit. Her departure was even more surgical. No thank you message, no exit Zoom, just an automatic out-of-office reply and a courier envelope returned to HQ with her ID badge inside. Then, just after 10 a.m., a global email went out from the board's interim legal team. Subject: personnel change notice effective immediately. EP of Operations name redacted. Is placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of an internal review concerning recent compliance and conduct concerns. No apology. No golden parachute. Just a polite throat cutting. I didn't even have to ask for it. This was the same man who stood in front of that conference table not long ago and screamed about my alleged breach of contract like he was Moses delivering commandments. Now, his access was frozen, Slack history archived, his name removed from the integration review chain. The mood inside the company turned fast. Investors started circling like buzzards. The valuation adjustment had already rattled them, but now they smelled internal instability. One of the minor backers publicly asked for clarity in a comment on LinkedIn. A thinly veiled threat. The stock took a hit, nothing catastrophic, but enough to get tongues wagging. Employees started DMing me, out of curiosity. Some with thinly veiled pleas. "Hey, not sure if you remember me, we worked together on the Q3 vendor audit. Any chance the acquiring firm's hiring?" Or, "I always admired how you ran things behind the scenes." If there's a place on the new team, I'd love a shot. I read them all. I didn't reply, not yet. But I kept every name, every timestamp, every little digital flag of loyalty tossed my way now that the tides had turned. And the Slack leak happened. It came from someone inside the executive assistant thread. A direct quote, screen capped and sent to a now former contractor, who immediately passed it to me with a one-line message. You should see this. The CEO, speaking about me in a closed thread, I didn't think she mattered. 6 words. That's all. 6 words that encapsulated the entire reason the company was bleeding out in the middle of its own acquisition. They didn't think I mattered. I printed the screenshot and taped it above my desk. That morning, I opened the first draft of my transition report. 8 pages, all operational findings mapped to impact metrics. No commentary, no bitterness, just clean forensic facts. At the bottom, under the section labeled Executive Alignment Recommendations, I began typing. Recommendation: replace the current executive team. Their documented actions, negligence, lack of cross-functional awareness pose a direct risk to integration success and long-term operational stability. I paused, reread it, and made one edit. I struck the word recommendation, changed it to requirement. Then I saved the file, PDF'd it, uploaded it to the shared board portal. No one pinged me, no one objected, because they finally understood something they'd never cared to learn. I was the last person holding the blueprint. I just redlined every name at the top. The lights were hotter than expected. Stage lighting always is. You sit under it, and suddenly every inch of you feels exposed: face, voice, memory. The rows of chairs stretched out ahead of me, filled with polite smiles, eager reporters, and executives pretending they hadn't just spent the last 6 weeks gutting their own leadership structure with a spoon. I stood off to the side, waiting for my cue, watching the buyer's CEO deliver his speech with the poise of a man who knew exactly how close he'd come to inheriting a nightmare. He didn't mince words. We pride ourselves on due diligence, he said, voice steady. But no spreadsheet, no system, no algorithm can compare to the insight of someone who lived the operations, who understood the fault lines, and chose, when it mattered most, to tell the truth. We owe this acquisition's success to her. He turned. He was instrumental in helping us make this smart, informed acquisition. Please welcome our new senior integration officer. He said my name. The applause was polite, measured, but the silence that followed was the real music, the kind that comes when people realize something's changed and not in their favor. I stepped to the mic, paperless. Calm. Thank you, I began. This has been a long road for a lot of people, many of whom worked hard behind the scenes, unnoticed, underappreciated. What we've achieved here wasn't just a transaction. It was a recalibration. I paused, just long enough to let the weight settle. Sometimes clarity doesn't come from the top. It comes from the fine print, a few quiet laughs. A few heads snapped toward my former CEO seated in the front row, red-faced, staring through me like I was a bad dream he hadn't woken from yet. I didn't look at him, not directly, because this wasn't for him. It never had been. Press swarmed after the closing handshake. Cameras, microphones. Someone shouted, "What's next for the executive team?" Another asked, "Was the whistleblower clause activated?" A third tried to confirm rumors about additional resignations. I gave them nothing. Just a smile and a walk-off, down the side stairs, through a side door, out into clean air and a clear sky. In my hand, one leather-bound folder. Labeled in gold foil, Transition Final Phase. Inside, my integration report. Stamped, signed, ready. At the top, the executive summary. At the bottom, the final review page. And halfway down the personnel section, one name was already crossed out in red ink. His. I walked past the valet, past the parking lot, past the future they thought they owned. They didn't realize I'd written the ending. Now, I was on the first page of something else. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.